Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Just days away from September, and with that, we're about to say bye-bye to the Sports Dead Zone Part 2, as this is one final podcast before a long stretch of non-stop, head-spinning sports talk at a breakneck speed, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first-timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And just some housekeeping before we begin. For starters, for the channel on YouTube at J Reels, I'll have another vlog forthcoming, a 6-month update as to me taking this venture into full-time content creator atmosphere. And let me tell you, it has been all that and a bag of chips, but there have been a couple of things along the way that have been challenging. And I guess just like anything else in life, either whether you're working a 9 to 5 or if you're working long hours into the night, graveyard, etc., or doing what I do, there's always going to be something that comes up or an obstacle that I'm going to have to hurdle over. But 3 of the biggest lessons that I've learned here so far in this 6-month journey into becoming a full-time podcast producer, host, content creator, etc., that'll come up on Saturday on the YouTube channel at J Reels, so keep your eyes out for that. And then, of course, I didn't mention this on Monday. My apologies, so I have to mention it now. Even though summer is about to set, not in these parts, especially with yours truly. We still have about 3.5 weeks to go officially until fall arrives. But for those who are looking to quench their thirst, because even if it's the middle of summer or even in the dead of winter, you're still going to need to at least get something down your throat that's going to be refreshing, that's going to be crisp, that's going to, like I said, quell that thirst. Olipop, O-L-I-P-O-P. And if you go to drinkolipop.com, you will save 15% by using the promo code JREELS at checkout. Of course, J-A-Y-R-E-E-L-Z. And they have all the flavors that you can imagine. The classics such as cola and lemon lime, root beer, ginger ale, cream, you name it. And then also they have some flavors that are out of the norm, whether it's watermelon lime, whether it's banana cream, whether it's tropical punch, which is my favorite. So go to drinkolipop.com as well as assorted packs. So you don't even have to stick with the one flavor unless you like cola, and I get it. But if you want to try an assortment of flavors, you can actually do that. Buy a case, buy a couple, buy a dozen. Send them to your friends, family, frenemies, foes, doesn't matter. If you use the promo code JREELS at checkout, one more time, you'll get 15% off your purchase. If you could do that, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. Once again, drinkolipop.com. Let's get to it. We could pretty much put a lid on the Sports Dead Zone because part 2. Obviously, we experienced the first go-around after the Super Bowl and right up until about the tournament, or you want to say the start of the baseball season, where things really kicked into high gear. Well, now we could put a lid on what has taken place pretty much since the early part of July after the NBA and NHL free agency period. And yes, you did have Wimbledon. Yes, you did have a Open Championship, formerly known as the British Open there in golf. And right now, even though you're in the middle of a US Open, which I'll get to later, but with college football and the season in earnest, beginning on Saturday, and yes, you'll have a couple of games there tonight to chew on, as well as tomorrow heading into the weekend. But we all know Saturday, the curtain will be raised. And that's where I'm going to begin. I'll get to the baseball and the Mets later on. But for this college football season, where it is highly anticipated, where it is being billed as the season to remember, and it hasn't even started. Yes, you could say it has to an extent, where Florida State losing to Georgia Tech, we talked about that on Monday over in Dublin. But for this season, for the lay of the land, this isn't a college football playoff year where you're just going to have the 4 teams. This is a scenario where it's been expanded. And that is going to be the overriding theme, not only just today, tomorrow, Monday, when we recap the weekend, but all year long. And on top of that, where we have expanded conferences, where we know the teams that have defected and moved on to the SEC, whether your name is Oklahoma or Texas, or the teams that went to the Big Ten, which you could say pretty much all of the Pac-12 for the most part, whether your name is Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, and you have a couple others that have, of course, scattered around and have moved on to greener pastures. But when we take a look at what's going to happen here with college football, how could you not, just when you take it from top to bottom, the schedule week in and week out, and we know that there's pockets where it is lame and pockets of the schedule in the past where there's not much going on. You kind of wait for that rivalry weekend in the end of November, right around Thanksgiving, where you have Ohio State, Michigan, and USC, UCLA, and matchups like that. But this year, there's going to be a high intense, a focus week in and week out on what these teams do, because unlike years past where if a team lost one game, chances are they're not going to make it. And yes, we have seen one team, lost teams go into the college football Final Four, but just take Florida State, for example. We talked about that on Monday, where their playoff chances and their hopes aren't going to be dashed by what happened last Saturday in Dublin. They actually may be a team that could lose 3 games this year and still qualify for the college football playoff. That's how much this season is going to be riding high, with a lot of intrigue, with a lot of drama, because we all know that every game matters. But if a team loses once, twice, and maybe even thrice, it doesn't necessarily mean that their shot for trying to get into the postseason is going to be dashed. And that is one thing that we are going to pay attention to. And yes, there may be weeks or Saturdays that you're not going to have the sexy matchup, or you're not going to have games that maybe be meaningful in the grand scheme of things. It's not as if you're going to have a slew of 5-star matchups from now till the end of November. But we know that the season is going to be on high alert with all of these matchups, with the conferences that have converged, and with the Big Ten, SEC in particular, that they're going to really be, week in and week out, a lot of focus on which teams are going to outlast the other in order for them to put themselves in position to qualify to make this playoff. And I don't see anywhere fit, when we look at the schedule, how could you not pay attention to this upcoming year? Now, there is a drawback, because when we look at last year, you're not going to have a scenario where, yes, you may have that team that has lost early on and they can't afford to lose again. And even though a lot of that drama could go out the window, so let's say if a team did lose their second game in the early part of October, they would not be heard from when it comes to the college football playoff. But a lot of the high stakes and a lot of the just interesting matchups, and when we take a look at teams that are trying to squeeze in to try to get that 4th seed, and we know about the controversy last year with Florida State, how they were undefeated, but the committee did not pick them to go into the playoff. And as we saw what happened there with Florida State getting just blasted by Georgia in the bowl game, you're not going to have to worry about that this year, which I understand could be a bit of a drawback, because now that team could almost put their feet up, knowing that, all right, we lost a game, we could probably afford to lose one more and still get in, maybe through the back door or not. And if we take this as an example, and I get it, this is going to change throughout the course of the year, but I'm just going to look at the top 12 teams right now that the AP has ranked in the country. So, for instance, everybody's looking at Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. Let's just say those 4 teams happen to win out. Now, mind you, Oregon and Ohio State, they're going to play one another in a few weeks. That is going to be an enormous game when it comes to the grand scheme of things and what the committee is going to do. But again, I'm just going based on this ranking here as of August 29th. And then from 5 down, Alabama, Ole Miss, and this is 5 through 12. Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, Florida State, Missouri, and Utah. Utah is capped out there at 12. So you'll have a scenario where, let's say if the playoff was tomorrow, you're going to have Utah, Alabama, Ole Miss, Missouri, Notre Dame, Florida State, which they play one another this year, Penn State, Michigan, and we've seen them play a million times over the years. Same conference, of course. So now you have a scenario where the 5 through 12 will then go ahead and play after the bye week that the top 4 teams will have. They'll be in a position to where they'll advance and then play those top 4 teams. Now, here's the one thing that we can look at right this second, and obviously we have to see the season unfold, in order to get a better look as to how this is really going to play out. But one of the storylines that I have, and just looking at Alabama as a 5 seed, can those teams that are going to have those opening rounds, which start off, I believe, December 20th, or maybe the 19th, going into the Christmas week, how those teams are going to fare against the top 4? Because just like the NFL, and this rarely happens, but you do get that occasional team, whether they have the 1 seed or 2 seed in the past, and obviously more recently, just the 1 seed gets to bye. How many of those teams will get picked off there because of the momentum of having that first game under your belt, or at least that first playoff game? And if you're Alabama, you've been there, done that. I understand a new coach there with Kalen DeBoer, no more than Nick Saban, but they're still Alabama. And let's say if Alabama goes in to play, let's say the 4 seed in Texas, because we would think that if it's 5, 6, 7, 8, let's just say for argument's sake, that would be the case, because Penn State would then play Georgia and Notre Dame would play Ohio State and go on down the line. So let's say you have a scenario where Alabama plays Texas. So now Texas, they're going to face a lot of pressure going up against Alabama, despite the fact that they may have had an undefeated season or maybe even a 1-loss season and winning a Big 12, let's just say if they do so. But can Alabama then win against Texas and then be a team going into a semifinal with a lot of gas in their tank, to the point where, because they've had that first round matchup, because they've already had that underneath their wing, that they could go ahead and fly to maybe a semifinal and, dare I even say, a national championship? Now, we know the pedigree of Alabama. Obviously, they're a team that could be there when it's all said and done. But that is one thing that I'm going to look at. And again, this is well on down the road. But could any of those 5 through 12 matchups be a team that could be, I don't want to say a Cinderella, but a team that could take themselves to a semifinal and a national championship? Because a lot of people are going to think that it's going to be the top 4, and then everybody else is just going to be roadkill and not going to be a match for those top 4 teams. And this is where it could be a bit of a crapshoot. This is where the playoff is just going to be phenomenal. And that's one thing that I'm going to look at. Again, down the road, I get it that it's more of a big picture thing. As far as the regular season on a whole, pretty much throw these teams in a hat and pull them out, and chances are those are going to be your top 12. Now, I get it, the teams that are outside of that, whether you're LSU, Clemson, Tennessee, they have pedigree in their own right, they could, of course, sneak up in there and try to get one of those 12 spots to qualify for a playoff. But it's kind of hard to break down from a sense where we would think that Georgia, Ohio State, we pretty much know what teams are going to be there. It's not necessarily similar to baseball, where the powerhouse teams are going to be there at the end, whether your name are the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Phillies, teams like that, or the Astros, teams like that, where we know it's going to be a foregone conclusion where they're going to qualify. And you could say the same even for the NBA, Celtics, and we know that the Milwaukee Bucks will be there. And this is the thing that you have with football or college football, that are trying to keep up with the Joneses from this standpoint of not only generating income for the universities, but also the TV rights and the billions of dollars that these networks are going to throw, and the streaming platforms, etc. And that's why content is king. And with college football just being enormous, especially over the last, really much from the beginning of time, but even more so since the college football playoff was ushered in about 11 years ago, that college football is looking to bank and say, we need to be a part of this in order for our sport to be maybe 1A to the NFL, as opposed to being 2, 3, 4, somewhere in the mix between the NBA, baseball, and dare I even say the National Hockey League. So as I look at it, it's easy for me to go chalk and say, oh yeah, Georgia's going to be there and Ohio State, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's almost, I'm not going to say it's hard to predict, because I could come out and say that I'm going to look at an Alabama-Georgia, let's just say, semifinal, along with Ohio State, and I'm just going to throw Notre Dame. One more time, throw these teams names in a hat and you could pick them out, and chances are, would you be shocked if any of these teams would be in the Final Four or even in a national championship? And I get it. You have to take it one playoff game at a time. And just like I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's not a situation where it's a foregone conclusion. These teams are automatically the top four. They're going to fight it out for a semifinal and therefore a national championship. I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama advanced to a semifinal. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these other teams that have pedigree and that have been teams that have done well, not only throughout the course of the regular season, but also in the postseason. Michigan, I get it. No Jim Harbaugh, no J.J. McCarthy. But can they be a team to be reckoned with? I don't know. I'm not going to say that right now, considering the new coach in tow and with the quarterback that they have at this very moment. Can they go back and repeat? I'm going to say no for right now. I can't trust Penn State because they never seem to win a big game. Missouri, Florida State, those are teams that maybe could win a game. But when it's all said and done, I would think that the powerhouses, just like we talk about with baseball, and yes, maybe last year notwithstanding when you had an Arizona-Texas World Series, but I would think Georgia, and that's the one storyline I'm going to go there, considering how their season ended last year, considering that they lost in an SEC championship game to Alabama and they were on the outside looking in. I'm sure the coach Kirby Smart and even Carson Beck, the quarterback, who's going to be a Heisman Trophy candidate, to me, I think that they are going to have a big chip on their shoulder knowing that they were this close and they just blew it against Alabama. And yes, they showed the world that even with Florida State and a lot of their seniors not playing in that game because of the bitterness that they should have played in a semifinal and that they were shut out by the committee. And what happened? They lost 63-3. So I think Georgia is the one team that's going to come out with a vengeance. And they're going to play Alabama here in a few weeks, which is going to be interesting because generally you won't see Alabama and Georgia until you get to an SEC championship. Not this time around. And that's what makes the college football schedule intriguing, to say the least. But whether it's them, whether it's Ohio State, and whether or not you believe in Ryan Day, and for them to see if they could try to get themselves in position to get to a title game, as we saw a couple of years ago with C.J. Stroud, they came this close to beating Georgia, and we understand they fell short with that field goal that was wide left. And then Oregon, you would think, with Dylan Gabriel, a guy who's also a Heisman Trophy candidate, and for everything that happened there last year with Dan Lanning and the coach and going far but losing to Washington there late in the year, as they would have had a good opportunity to be one of those Final Four teams, but they got just railroaded, not necessarily railroaded, but the Huskies were able to outlast them and put themselves in a spot where they were one of the Final Four teams standing. So how I look at this college football season, especially with the powerhouses, I could see them there at the end. It's a matter of what those 5 through 12 teams and where they stack. How are they going to be a team to advance to at least a semifinal to show that this isn't just going to be chalk, that despite them qualifying, this isn't going to be a scenario where they're going to be sacrificial lambs in the next round. And that's going to be big. And the season as it is going to be one to watch. Not only because of the playoff, but because the regular season has even a lot more meaning because of the expanded playoff. I mean, please, I'm not going out on a limb by saying that. But one thing for sure is that they've put a lot of juice into this upcoming season. Of course, all the promos, you've seen it everywhere. And yes, I could have to even commend them for putting this out the way they do. And yes, they're going to beat it over your head here over the next few days, as much college football as you're going to watch. Oh, this is the epic season, one that we're going to remember forever. Oh, this is something that we haven't seen. And yes, they're absolutely right. But how much of it is going to be thrown and jammed down our throats here over the first, I would say, 3-4 weeks of the season until it takes it to shape? So, for starters, that's what I have there. And I understand I'm kind of all over the map because it's not as if there are teams that I'm going to zero in on. Now, of course, I talked about Georgia. I think that's the one team I would think if I'm going to pick who's going to win it all this year, I'm picking them. And yes, I understand that's chalk. I understand that, because they're ranked number one. But just based on what I told you a few minutes ago, to me, it's that chip on the shoulder. It's knowing that they're going to come back with a vengeance. They, I'm sure, already had that Alabama game circled on their calendar, and they're going to try to blitz through this regular season. And who knows, maybe they'll have some stretches where, like if you remember last year with Missouri, that they were in a Donnybrook with them before beating them. I believe that game was in Missouri. But they may have their moments where it's going to be ho-hum. But they could also be a team that's going to come out a la without the end result. The 2007 Patriots, when they were just literally blitzing everybody and the entire NFL by storm, blowing teams out, not taking any prisoners, showing up and showing out. And I could see Georgia having that type of year, considering how last year ended, especially when they lost to Alabama. But for this weekend, and before I even get to that, one other thing, let me just make sure. 5 to 12 matchups, just a couple of things. Yes, obviously the expanded conferences, as I talked about. And this regular season, will it match the drama of what we've seen over the last 10, 11 years when it comes to the college football playoff? Will it come down to the wire for some of these teams that are on the outside looking in? That's where you're going to have the intrigue. And for me, as much as I've been into college football, especially over the last, as long as I've been doing the podcast, because as a boy, and for those who are listening for the very first time, college football wasn't really on my radar. Did I watch? Did I pay attention? Yeah, I did, but it wasn't as if week in, week out, I was on top of it. Because let's face it, here in the Northeast, in the New York area, there really isn't a team that you're going to rally around, at least locally, to say, all right, this is my team, I'm going to follow them. What, Rutgers? No, not this guy. So college football wasn't really a sport that I grasped and had a team to really rally around and then carry that through my teen years into my young adulthood and then just really got wrapped up into college football as a boy. Not the case. Yes, I could go back in the history books and talk about the great college games and we could go through it, especially as long as I've been alive. But I would say over the last 20 years, I've really been a lot more into it, as well as even just since the playoff began, where of course I've been just occupied by what's going to take place week in, week out. And we know that there's a lot of peaks and valleys with the schedule. But this year, I could see it being probably more consistent than we've ever seen because of the magnitude of these teams that are going to be hovering anywhere between, I'll say, 9 and 16. As we know, they're going to jockey for position to see who's going to try to get up there. And remember, this is all going to be based on what the committee thinks. This is not a situation where even if you're 12th in the nation and picked on the polls as of right this second, if you're Utah, that's not going to guarantee you a postseason bid. I'm sure there's going to be a team laying in the weeds. Now, let me ask you this. And Utah's been formidable over the years, so it's not as if they're a slouch. But if LSU, let's say they have 2 losses and Utah has 1, but you know that the committee, based on strength of schedule and based on their pedigree over the last 20 years, granted that they haven't been great. When I say great, I'm talking about LSU great. I'm not talking about great being 9-3 and 7-2 in the conference. But you know that the committee's going to take LSU over Utah because they're going to look at that as eyeballs to the sets, SEC, to have, let's say, Utah. Let's say if there were a 12 seed and Alabama was a 5. Alabama, LSU is your first round game. They're going to snap that up in a heartbeat. There's no way that Utah's going to survive that unless they're undefeated and Utah has 2 losses on their ledger. Then that's a different story. The Utes will have an argument as to why they didn't get the 12th spot based on LSU. It doesn't matter what they do unless one of those wins were against Alabama or they had a big win on the road somewhere, and I don't have the schedule in front of me, but you get the picture. So college football, it is going to be in a blender all year. And like I said, I think Georgia, people are going to say, oh, Jay Reels, that's weak. How are you going to pick them? How could you not? From the standpoint of everything that I just detailed about 7-8 minutes ago. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually looking forward more to the college football season in the NFL, and I'll get to that in a little while. But as we take a look at the schedule this week, tonight you're going to have a game where Colorado's going to play. And I know that Deion's been in the news here between reporters with CBS and I think Paul Feinbaum and a lot of what's gone down there. Even the Denver Post, I believe there was a guy that who covers the team. I believe he's been banned from the locker room. And Deion, I get it. He's not going to be good with criticism. As much as he loves the haters and as much as he loves to have people hate on him, hate on the team, the program, etc., he's going to speak his mind. You know he's not going to pull any punches. And for Colorado, who, I get it, a lot of people looked at what happened to them last year, right out of the gate, beating TCU, who was the runner-up to Georgia the year before, and they got off to that hot start, and all the celebrities went out there, and then before you know it, they nosedived pretty much to the bottom, if not to the near the bottom of their conference, to where they weren't heard from pretty much after Oregon blew their doors off sometime in the early part of October. So Colorado, they're going to be front and center tonight. I would think that a lot of people are going to tune in just to see. I'm sure a lot of people want to see Deion fail. There are a lot of Deion haters out there. But me, for one, and listen, I hope they go to a good start. I have nothing against Deion. I have nothing against the Buffaloes and their program. So I'm not one to just all of a sudden be like, yeah, I hope Deion has just a terrible year this year. Why would I even think that? But for the Buffaloes tonight, they'll start off their season. And I believe that's an ESPN game, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check that. Or is that game tomorrow? Do I have my schedule all mixed up? This is Jay Reels right off the bat. Here I am. Just, there we go. As far as the games that are going to take place starting tonight, you have, and these are teams that are ranked. I know NC State, they're at the bottom there. Missouri's going to play tonight. Murray State, of course, I just talked about them a little while ago. But Colorado's playing North Dakota State. That's what I was looking at. 8 o'clock ESPN. So they should get off to a good start there. The game's in their building. They'll blow their doors off. And then I'm sure everybody's going to talk about how, all right, you beat North Dakota State if Colorado wins 45-10. But that's how it's going to be, at least for this first week. Let's see, as the season moves along, how Colorado will perform. But even with a couple of games or a few games tomorrow, with Oklahoma being the highlight there, and they'll also be on ESPN, Georgia and Clemson. Clemson, that's a big game for them. They're going to have to go on the road to Georgia, but it is not going to be played in Athens. It's going to be played at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, of course, where the Falcons play. But here's your Saturday slate. You have that to kick you off with your college football season. Then you also at 3:30 have Miami and Florida to start off your year. Miami is ranked at 19. Florida, not so much, but the game is in the Swamp. That is an in-state rivalry game. Yes, it doesn't have the same panache as Miami, Florida State, or Florida State, Florida, but still, Miami and Florida as your opening game, that a lot of people, especially in that state, are going to focus in on. And then the nightcap you have there is Notre Dame going to College Station to play Texas A&M. And we know about Notre Dame. They're a team that they could only go as high as 5, despite the fact that if they do go undefeated, because they're an independent, we know that the top 4 teams are going to be based on them winning their conference. So, of course, that's SEC, that's Big 10, that's Big 12. Obviously, no more Pac-12 people. They're going to get those bids right off the bat. And then, obviously, you're going to have a scenario where another conference is going to win, and then you're going to have your 5th seed. And in all likelihood, that could be Notre Dame. So you'll have that as your nightcap there, as Texas A&M is ranked in the top 25. And then Sunday, you're going to have USC and LSU. That game is going to be played at Allegiant Stadium. And then Florida State, which you know they're going to be chomping at the bit, as they'll play at home against Boston College. So they're going to try to wipe off the stink of what happened there in Dublin this past Saturday. So with a 9-day layoff, you know they're going to be ready to go in their home opener to see if they can get back on the beam, and I would think that they will. And that is your opening week for college football. Like I said, I'm anticipating it. It's going to be a crazy year. And it's good for me and what it is that I do. Obviously, it's going to be on my radar, and it has been on my radar as long as I've done the podcast. But with all the games and with all the matchups and with the stakes being as high as they are for these teams trying to get into the playoffs, it's brilliant. It's fantastic. And I don't like it that in 2 years, and although it hasn't been finalized and official, but the powers that be in the NCAA, they already want to push this to a 14-team playoff in 2 years. Can we at least go through 1 year and see how this looks? And you know they're going to go to 14 at some point, whether it's in 2 years, 4 years, etc. But you know they're going to accelerate this because the regular season, everybody's going to be geeked up. All these teams have something to play for, at least the teams that are in the top 20, and I'll include the 20. 20th team because they feel like, hey, if we could get a big jump or at least win a big game against a big opponent, the committee may look at us and say, hey, can we squeeze in as a 12 seed? So, yes, it is going to be a great season. It is one that everybody's going to watch, and you know that I'll be on top of it, and we'll talk about these games here on Monday and then obviously go through the season as such. Now, let me turn my attention. I'm going to take off the helmet and shoulder pads for now. I'll get to the NFL after I talk about some baseball as I get into the batter's box. And I know I didn't talk about them on Monday. I know I didn't make a mention of that final game in San Diego. Because if you recall, for those who watch on YouTube at JReels or listen on Apple, Spotify, jreels.com, etc., a week ago today, I came in with good spirits. I came in with a lot of positivity. I came in as if I was burning sage over my head throughout the apartment, put on Met garb, Met shirt, Met hat, thinking that this was going to be their season. A 10-game road trip, which was sandwiched in by another 10-game road trip out west as well, if you recall. Anaheim, a stop in St. Louis, all right, fine, before going to Colorado and Seattle. Then they had that 9-game homestand in which they went 5-4. And then now this 10-game road trip, which will conclude the first 2/3 of it in Arizona this afternoon, before going to the Windy City to play the dreaded White Sox, who are in the middle of a 6-game losing streak, who have a 103 record and had the second fastest to 100 losses in the history of the sport. So today is a must win, but this is not after what I witnessed last night, which is on the heels of what I witnessed there on Sunday. And let me do a little bit of history for you if you weren't paying attention. Sunday, the Mets had an opportunity to win 3 out of 4 in San Diego. They had a 2-0 lead in the 8th inning where Jose Butto gave it up to where with 1 out, he walked the batter and then gave up a 2-run homer to Jurickson Profar. All right, the game is tied at 2. In comes Edwin Diaz to preserve a tie and hope to push it into extra innings. What happens? Jackson Merrill comes up, hits it out of the ballpark. Padres, who were down 2-0 going into the 8th inning, 2 in the 8th, 1 in the 9th, split the series, and now the Mets have to go to Arizona with a day off on Monday to have to sit on that to where they did not gain much ground. The Braves, who now go into Minnesota, sweeping the Twins, and with the day off and the Mets winning 8-1 on Tuesday night, where Pete Alonso now tied Mike Piazza for 3rd time on the club's home run list at 220. And then you have last night. Last night was a scenario where the Mets trailed early. Luis Severino didn't really seem to have it, although he struck out a ton of batters. He struck out 9 in his performance last night. But here it was, a game that the Mets, all right, it looks like it's going to be one of those type of games where the Diamondbacks got out to an early lead, and in fact, they got out to a 4-0 lead heading into the 5th inning before the Mets came roaring back to not only tie the game, but they also took the lead in the following inning, tied the game where Harrison Bader had the 2-run homer to tie it, and then the Mets get another run on a Pete Alonso sacrifice fly. So now you're thinking, all right, 5-4, let's see if they can tack on more runs, let's see if they can hang in there, etc. And then the 8th inning arrives. Remember that 8th inning in San Diego? Well, I guess whatever bad karma was happening there, it certainly brought it over to the desert. So now you have a scenario where Carlos Mendoza, and I can't fault him, he brings in Edwin Diaz. So now Diaz, with a runner on first, he proceeds to walk 2 batters. Wild as can be. So now a 5-4 lead, slimmest of margins, runner on first. And we know that when closures come in the middle of innings, it's trouble. So what happens, he walks 2 guys badly. His first 10 pitches, 4 of them, or 2 of them are strikes, so he walks them like nothing. And in comes Corbin Carroll. And I thought to myself, watch this be a scenario where Carroll, who does have pop as we know, and if you watch the game, you already know what happened. But I thought that this was going to be a scenario, and this is being the jaded, cynical Met fan that I am, this is either going to be a shot down the line or a shot in the gap. It's going to be a bases clearing double. A 5-4 lead is going to be a 7-5 deficit, and the Mets are going to go quietly in the 9th, and that's it. I was only upstaged by the baseball gods because what happened? Corbin Carroll hit one to the swimming pool. And the game, which I thought would be 7-5, excuse me, turned out to be a grand slam 8-5, and the Mets go kaput. Braves sweep the Twins, and now they are currently, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 games back for the last wildcard spot in the National League. And I got news for you people. I understand this weekend, especially in the Mets, is a must-win for the Mets today, without a doubt. And this is the reason why. The Braves go to Philadelphia for 4 games starting tonight. So let's see. Now, the Braves are cooking a little bit with some oil only because they are 5 games back in the division. So let's just say, for argument's sake, if they sweep this weekend, they'll end up just 1 game behind the Phillies. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, considering what we saw with Kansas City and Cleveland, and I'll get to them in a little bit. If you didn't know, Kansas City had a 4-game deficit going into that series against the, excuse me, it was a 3-game deficit going into that series against the Guardians. They took the first 3 games to be in a flat-footed tie before losing yesterday, and I'll tell you how they lost in that game, like I said, in a short while. But this is it for the Mets, because after this, they come home, they play the Red Sox, who right now they're flailing, and it looks like they could be out to sea when it comes to their playoff possibilities. And they have a very tough schedule. They still have multiple games with the Phillies. They got to go to Atlanta, and we already know, and I'm going to put this to bed in a second in reference to the Braves, and they have to end their season in Milwaukee. In fact, their final week is 3 in Atlanta and 3 in Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee may not have much to play for. Maybe a top 2 seed in the National League to get a bye. Who knows with the players? Sometimes they don't even think about that when it comes to the grand scheme of things. They just want to get to the playoffs, whether they play in a wild card or have a bye. Who knows? But the Mets need to win this afternoon. No ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it before going to Chicago. And they have to sweep the White Sox at this point. No 2 out of 3. No just winning a series. They have to win these next 4 games before we get to Monday and reconvene then. Because if they don't, they're not going to make the playoffs. As it is right now, I don't think they're going to make it to the postseason because of their schedule, because of who lies ahead, and it is going to be daunting for this team for them to get the pitching and even more so the bullpen. Edwin Diaz, 2022, where have you gone? And I talked about him earlier this year, obviously with the Tommy Trumpets or Timmy Trumpets, whatever that guy, that's long gone. I don't even want to hear that anymore, and I talked about that in May. Check those receipts. So all I'm going to say about this before I move on is if the Mets don't win 4 in a row here, and if the Phillies don't take 3 out of 4, it's over. Forget it. They're not going to make it to the postseason. So the Mets would have to pick up 2 games over the weekend here in order for me to even think, to believe that they have a shot. So I'm just going to leave it right there. And as for the aforementioned Royals, and oh, I know that was a crusher, where the Royals had the Guardians on the ropes, and they played well in that series. They actually beat the Guardians beat them up pretty good over the first 3 games of the series, and had a 5-2 lead, I believe, going into the 7th. Or maybe it was in the 6th inning before it all fell apart. Guardians scored 4, then they tacked on another run as they had a late surge to salvage that final game and take over sole possession of first place over the Royals. And I thought that that was important because if the Royals would have won that game, now they got to go to Houston. And Houston just got beaten 2 out of 3 in Philadelphia, although yesterday they answered back with Yordan Alvarez hitting 3 home runs and Spencer Arringhetti throwing a no-hitter into the 8th inning. And they won 10-0, so at least they left Philadelphia feeling a lot better about themselves. But now the Royals got to go to Houston. And that's going to be an interesting series this weekend to keep an eye on, because is this going to be a scenario where, not to say the Royals are going to fall off, because I think they're going to make it to the postseason now. I don't know what the Red Sox are going to do here when we get into September. And they got a bunch of games with the Yankees. They have 3 with the Mets, but, next week. And who knows? I think with that, I think that's later on in the month where Yankees and Red Sox will face one another. But the Royals, I think, will be fine to make it to the playoffs, but I want to see them beat and play against good competition. All right, the Guardians, because they're ahead of them in the division, and obviously drew even with them as early as yesterday morning. But I still need to see more, and they do have a very tough schedule. They still have to play the Yankees for 4. I believe they still have the Dodgers on the schedule. So let's see them go through that gauntlet before I could really look at them as a team that maybe, when it's all said and done, could be in first place and win a division there in the AL Central. But got to give it up. They did a phenomenal job this week, but let's see what they do here in Houston and put a scenario where I could really be a believer in the Royals. And just when you thought you've seen everything in baseball, you've seen it all. And I'm sure you saw the story about Danny Jansen, the Red Sox, who was a Blue Jay back in May. And if you recall, they had to suspend the game back then where Danny Jansen was in the lineup and played as a member of the Blue Jays. And because he got traded to the Red Sox before the deadline there in the latter part of July, he actually suited up and played for the Red Sox in the game just a couple of days ago, which made him the first ever player in baseball history to play for two different teams in the same game. Because they started that game, I believe it was back in May, and he played as a member of the Blue Jays, and then now he finished up that same game that was suspended in a Red Sox uniform. I mean, who would have thought that? Kind of brought me back to Joe Youngblood. There's a name of the past for those who know baseball, follow baseball, especially as a Met fan. He was the only guy, and is the only guy in Major League Baseball history to have 2 hits in one day for 2 different teams. He did so as a member of the Mets when he suited up and had a base hit against the Cubs in Wrigley Field. Of course, the Cubs back then, up until '88, they played only day games. So he had a base hit and then was traded midway point of the game. So I believe he got that hit in the first couple of innings, and I believe maybe in the middle innings was traded from the Mets to Montreal and then suited up for the Expos against the Phillies. And what did he do then? Veterans Stadium, got a base hit off of Steve Carlton. So it kind of reminded me of that when I harken back to just strange facts and trivia that's going to be forever etched in baseball fans and maybe even sports fans for that matter's memory. So I just thought to throw that out there when it comes to Danny Jansen. Now, as far as overall what we've seen here in the sport over the last few days, again, not much to uncover or unpack here, but I will say this. The Yankees, Jekyll and Hyde. They lose 2 out of 3 to the Nationals here. Carlos Rodon did not pitch well. This Yankee team, I don't know if I could really trust them. And I don't want to make it about the Yankees now. I just bring it up because, like I said, throughout the course of this week, you didn't really have much cooking. I know Kansas City, Cleveland was the one storyline because of where the Royals were 3 games back as a Monday, and then had a shot to be in first place all by their lonesome there if they would have swept that series against the Guardians. But the Yankees are puzzling, and yes, they're going to make it to the postseason. Are they going to win a division? That remains to be seen. And Baltimore had a shot to tie the Yankees after them losing those back 2 games against the Nationals. But the night owned by Shohei Ohtani, not only was it his bobblehead night, but it was also his bobblehead and his dog, I believe, was part of the bobblehead, and then throwing out the first pitch, and he hit another home run, had 2 more steals. As the Dodgers went going away, they led 5-0 at one point, and they win 6-4. But as a matter of fact, they didn't lead. They actually trailed 3-1 before the heroics of Ohtani. My apologies there. And that was against Corbin Burns, their ace. So for the Orioles, they weren't able to make up ground on the Yankees to be in that tie for first place in the AL East. And then, as we talked about with the other division race, especially in the AL West, I know the Mariners have inched a little closer, 4 in a loss, 3.5 back, considering that the Phillies took care of the first part of that series against the Astros, but we would think that the Astros should be home free. Phillies and Braves, a big series. I'll talk about the schedule in a minute. That's another series that everybody's going to be paying attention to see what the Braves could do in Philadelphia. Maybe they could win 3 out of 4, or dare I even say get the first 3 to potentially sweep and maybe be a game back. I don't think that's going to be the case, but again, this is why we watch. Diamondbacks and Padres are still 3 and 4 games back of the Dodgers in the NL West. We know what's happening in the NL Central. That's the one division that's pretty much already on ice. As the Brewers, you could pretty much already have them punch their ticket, although they haven't been officially a playoff team. But come on, they are not going to succumb to the Cubs or Cardinals. And the Cubs, we want to talk about a wild card, and I don't even want to include them But the Cubs have played pretty well here. Now, they are a game and a half back, 2 in the loss behind the Mets. But can I really include them here? They're going to fizzle at some point. And their schedule, after them beating up on the Pirates, they go to Washington to play the Nationals. Now, of course, the Nationals coming off of a series win over the Yankees, but who knows? Maybe the Cubs think and believe that they could get that much closer to the Mets and maybe even try to challenge Atlanta. But I'm one that right now I'm not going to say that's the case. But if the Cub fan wants to believe, to think that they can achieve that, have at it. Not this guy. But the wild card is pretty much the same as it was left there a couple of days ago. Orioles, Royals, and Twins. The Royals got a little bit of distance over the Twins because the Twins have not played well here as they got swept by the Braves in their own building. So they have fallen a little bit back in the wild card pack, where the Red Sox are just 3 games and 3 in a loss behind the Twins. Tigers, talk about a team that has also risen to the top of the, I don't want to say top of the heap, but top of the wild card pack, because they have just been coming out like gangbusters. They've won 6 in a row. They are in a scenario like the Cubs, where they're a game and a half, but 2 in a loss behind the Red Sox in the wild card chase, and 5 back of the Twins. And that's going to be interesting to see how many games they have left. And let me pull that up. How many games that the Tigers have against the Twins? Do they have 7 left, which would really be intriguing? As a matter of fact, they already finished. And that's the thing about not having the imbalanced schedule or unbalanced schedule, where they already played their games, Detroit and Minnesota this year, because their schedule right now, they have a final game against Anaheim, an interesting series. They will host the Red Sox this weekend, so they can even overtake them when it's all said and done. If they polish off the Angels this afternoon in Detroit, then they got to go to San Diego, at Oakland, Colorado. They got Baltimore a couple of times, Kansas City sandwiched in there, and they still have the White Sox later on. Now, listen, it is a long shot for the Tigers, but they played well, and maybe in some parts have put themselves as part of the discussion. I only bring them up because they've been hot like the Cubs, but please, I can see 2 weeks from now, they will fizzle out and will be well down the standings there in the wild card. But for grins and giggles, I'll bring them up because they're currently tied with the Mariners, 4.5 back in the wild card. And then in the National League, it's the same. Mets are 4 back right now, the Braves, and we already talked about their situation. It's do or die, and Monday, it's either going to be their season's put to rest or they've gained a couple of games and they're going to hang around. So that's what I have with the baseball as we move it along here. NFL, back with the helmet and shoulder pads as the season is just 1 week away from commencing. Baltimore going to Kansas City to start off another NFL campaign. And yes, we survived cut day, where it was very uninspiring. I mean, really, I'm going to go crazy about Kadarius Toney being cut by the Chiefs. And they bring back Juju Smith-Schuster. So, all right, big whoop there. Ernest Jones, who had a trade request, he gets his wish. He goes to Tennessee. All right. Am I going to go crazy about that? No. CeeDee Lamb gets his money. I know what's going to happen with Micah Parsons or Dak Prescott. Now, Prescott's going to be, I would think, a lame duck because he's going into his final year of his contract. I don't think that between now and next Sunday, who knows? We've seen in the past where contracts are drawn up on the flight to their city, and Dallas is going to open up their season in Cleveland, to where, who knows? Does Micah Parsons get his sweetheart deal? What about Dak? I don't know if that's going to be the case, but if you're a Cowboy fan, you do have CeeDee Lamb in tow. Second highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the sport. So kudos to Lamb. And as far as the season overall, if you ask me, 1 week away, and I know I always come out and say, wake me up week 1. I'm not really into the Thursday night game. Of course, I'm going to watch. I'm going to follow. I mean, that's what I do. But to me, Sunday at 1, that's when the season begins. And I know I'm in probably the biggest minority that I could ever possibly be in when it comes to our toy department of the world. And yes, once we get to next Sunday, 1 o'clock, and Pittsburgh will be at Atlanta and all the games, yes. But I have to say, I am not geeked up for this NFL season. I don't know. Is it because I don't want to let go of summer? Yes, I'm more wrapped up in the college football season and the NFL. a lot of this has to do, people, and I know it's not a matter of I'm going to gripe about it. I got to get over it. This is not only just NFL in the year 2024. This is the world that we live in 2024. The NFL has lost a lot of its steam in my eyes because of the oversaturation of these games being played on all these platforms. And I talked about it. If you want to hear me gripe and moan and complain, bitch, etc., I posted this about 6-7 months ago on my YouTube channel at JReels. I know I'm plugging it big time, people. Come on, let's go. Subscribe, rate, like, comment, etc. Where I had my 7 reasons why I was down on the NFL. And one of those reasons is that they're just everywhere. I mean, think about this, people. You have Thursday night, which is customary. We've seen it throughout the last 2 decades. All right, fine. You had the Friday night game in Sao Paulo between the Eagles and Cowboys. Then you have Sunday at 1, no problem. 4:25, we get it. Sunday night game, absolutely. Then you have the Monday night game. And then it just starts up all over again to where you have Thursday, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Sunday, Monday. Then we have Christmas, the Wednesday. Then we have another Friday, Black Friday. It's too much. The reason why the NFL was so special in my eyes was because you just waited for Sunday. You waited for the season to begin. You waited for Sunday at 1 to go to your local sports bar. Or if you had the Sunday ticket back in the day where I had it on DirecTV, that yes, you could just watch my team, but you could bounce around, go to the 8 box and watch the other games. And yes, I get it. You could still do that. And you still have the option to watch those games. Now it's on YouTube, of course. But it's lost a lot of that. Because as you get into the season and when you have the buys start to usher in, and then you have the London games that start at 9:30 and your 1 o'clock games all of a sudden become, instead of 8, they're now 6. And a lot of those matchups are not going to be sexy because with all these mouths to feed that the NFL has, the sexy matchups are going to be the 4:25 game. It's going to be the Sunday night game. It's going to be the Thursday night game. It's going to be the Monday night game. I mean, what are you going to have left? You're going to have a lot of Seattle at Arizona's. You're going to have a lot of Tennessee at, you name it. Carolina. Now, they're probably not playing against one another this year, but you get the point. And it just loses a lot of its steam, if you ask me. And that's one of the reasons why the NFL, I've fallen out of favor for them just trying to get the bag. But here's the irony. The NFL already has the bag. I mean, how much more money can they make? We understand that they're a juggernaut. We understand that they're bulletproof. We understand that they're impenetrable. That's why I call them the Shield. But that's why me as an NFL fan, and I've watched the sport since the mid-70s, it does not have the same flair. It's lost a lot of its special. When you look forward to Sunday at 1, you look forward to it. And yes, do we still do when it's all said and done? Absolutely. But there's so many other just things involved. Fantasy football, the gambling aspect. I understand gambling's been there forever and fantasy for decades. But now it's just so driven. The sport is just so focused on being in bed with the gambling houses to get the money, to have these players and the extended seasons. Now I'm bitching and moaning. I will stop right there. Just go to the vlog that I posted and you'll get a better and more clear understanding as to why, yeah, I'm just not pumped up for this NFL season. And it's not even because, oh, Russell Wilson's your starting quarterback over Justin Fields. To me, that's small potatoes. I knew Russell Wilson was going to start. I would have been shocked if Justin Fields started under center come Sunday at 1 in Atlanta. 100%. And yes, when that curtain's raised, I'll be ready. Let's see a week from today how I'm going to respond. But right now, I'm still in summer mode. Look at the shirt, what I'm wearing. I'm sure people are wondering, why does JReels have a silhouette of a girl in a bikini, and here it is, a sports show? Well, it does say Plain Jane Summer underneath it, and I even forgot, shake and bake. All right, if there's a little bit too much for the kids' eyes, I get it. I'm not trying to sell sex here by any stretch, but it is a summer t-shirt. So even though it's not officially over until the middle, toward the latter part of September, but in the eyes of a lot of people, this is the unofficial ending of summer. So I thought, I don't even throw on the shirt. because the shirt isn't going to mean anything if I wear it in the middle of December or even sometime in the latter part of February. So that's what I got there with the NFL people, and you know I'll be all over it. Come next week, I get it. I just got to start up the engine. Monday, I'll go get into over-unders. Obviously, I'll have a preview next week, so you definitely want to stay tuned for that. And then finally, to wrap it all up here, the U.S. Open is in the middle of their tournament. Not a lot to really sink your teeth into. I know Stefanos Tsitsipas, who was a top 5 tennis player on the men's side, loses in the first round. He's been awful over the last year. Besides that, you don't really have any major upsets. I know that Naomi Osaka beat Jelena Ostapenko. I believe Ostapenko was ranked 10th or 11th. So yes, people are going to look at that as an upset, but come on. She is Naomi Osaka, even though she may be unranked, and we understand, what she's been through over the years. But this is a woman that has 4 majors in her back pocket. So this is not a slouch we're talking about. So Ostapenko got a bad part of the draw for her, as she is already ousted. But the big story over the week, and I get it that maybe to a lot of people, they don't really care because it didn't involve Novak Djokovic or Carlos Alcaraz or Iga Swiatek, Elena Rybakina, Aryna Sabalenka, Coco Gauff. But you did have an epic 5-hour and 35-minute match between Daniel Evans and Karen Khachanov, to where you had tiebreakers all over the place, more so in the early part. Actually, in the first 3 sets, they all went to long tiebreaker matches or tiebreaker sets, to where Evans won set 2 and 3, but that was the reason why it lasted the way it did. I mean, 5 hours and 35 minutes, which is an open record. I mean, you can't even make that up. But who knows how much Evans is going to be long for this tournament. Now, I don't know where he's ranked, but we certainly know that he's not in the near the second or even third tier when it comes to tennis players on the men's circuit. But hey, he's always going to have that at least in his back pocket for as long as he lives, that he played the longest U.S. Open match in its history. Maybe that will, and I'm sure he's going to play today because this happened on Tuesday. So let's see if he has any legs, and I guess maybe pun intended, in this tournament. So that's something to look out for, to see whether or not Evans does advance into the weekend. If he doesn't, I guess we can understand why. I'm sure he was probably in a cold plunge the remainder of Tuesday to get himself ready for today's matchup. And I don't even know who he's facing. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Excuse me as I see what's happening with today's draw. Now, I know Novak Djokovic is going to be, I believe, center court tonight. Yep, Dan Evans. Yeah, we know about him. You're scheduled for today. Evans. No, we don't want that. All right, let me see if I can do that in the next couple of minutes. Men's singles. Here we go for Thursday. Let's see where he will match up against. Watch him match up against somebody. All right, he's going to match up against a guy named Mariano Navone at 4 p.m. And Navone, let's see where he's from. Navone is from Argentina. 23 years of age, ranked 36 on the tour. And let me see where Evans is ranked real quick. And Evans is a Brit. He is unranked. 34 years of age. So he's going up against a young guy, 23. And Khachanov, I'm sure he's much younger than him. So Evans, let's see what he could do here. If he's going to be the underdog or the Cinderella story of this tournament, if he could go ahead, win today, and get himself into the weekend after facing off against Mariano Navone. So we will continue to keep my eyes and my fingers on the pulse of what's happening there in Flushing Meadow and anything and everything else that's going on in the world of sports, because that will put a capper on the latest episode of the J Reels podcast. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is that I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. As always, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I don't know how much more I could say it. At J Reels, as well as the audio version on Apple, Spotify, video version on Spotify as well, for those who subscribe there. JReels.com is the website. And if you could do so, subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review. Please, people. I'm doing this full time. This is my job. And slowly but surely, I want to start generating some income. And the only way I could do that is by you going out there and doing your part. If you could do so, you know that I'll be forever grateful. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the J Reels Podcast, Twitter, X, JReels1, just a number. The old-fashioned way to jreelspodcast@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA since day one. If you couldn't tell from the tenor of my voice, the passion, fire, fury, and energy, then I don't know. I got to either ratchet it up even more or you're just going to have to keep coming back as now we can say goodbye to the Sports Dead Zone and usher in college football, the NFL next week. Obviously, the pennant races in baseball, or at least what's left of them. Before you know it, training camp in the NHL, training camp in the NBA. It is going to be on and popping here over the last 4 months of this year. And this is your one-stop shop for 1 hour of just passionate sports talk coming from yours truly, unlike any other. So you already know. As all of my thoughts, feelings, opinions, analysis, critiques, praise on anything and everything that happens on the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are. The J Reels podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. Have a safe, happy Labor Day weekend. You know I'm going to be working on Monday to bring up the next edition of the J Reels podcast. And until that time, everybody, on the flip, baby.